أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم برضوان إلى يوم الدين. So in this series today we are going to go over Juz 7. Some verses from the Juz 7. Obviously in 30 minutes it's not possible to cover much in terms of the whole Juz. But when you recite these verses, what I try to do is pick up a few verses that I find important and I find more interesting. And I find they have a more fundamental message, a much more fundamental principle is being conveyed in those verses. So I just pick up those verses and go over them. So today, as we open the Quran and on the Juz 7, the very first page, you find this verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تحرموا طيبات ما أحل الله لكم ولا تعتدوا إن الله لا يحب المعتدين وكلوا مما رزقكم الله حلالا طيبا واتقوا الله الذي أنتم به مؤمنون. Believers, do not hold as unlawful the good things which Allah has made lawful to you, and do not exceed the bounds of right. Allah does not love those who transgress the bounds of right, of what is halal. So what I wanted to do today is that as we come to this verse, which is the verse number 88 of the Surah Al-Ma'idah, and yesterday we were discussing the very first verse of Surah Al-Ma'idah, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, La tuhillu sha'air Allahi wala shahr al-haram. Don't make something permissible for you that Allah has prohibited. And He include not only the strict halal al-haram, but the sha'air that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed for you, that you should not even violate those sha'air. I think it is very important that we understand this concept from Quran, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declares as to what is permissible and what is not permissible. That authority only belongs to Him and no one else. It doesn't belong to any other human being, and if the prophets do that, they do that under the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one else can say that. I mean, anyone else, any other scholar can try to determine what Allah's intent was in conveying certain verses and what it means and what the details are based on his or her own understanding. But human beings don't have this allowance that then go on their own and start declaring what is right and what is wrong, what is permitted by Allah and what is not permitted by Allah. That criteria belongs to Allah, and only He can do that. Now, oftentimes one misunderstanding that I feel we find in the society is that sometimes we are very careful, and not those of us who are too observant, very careful in terms of not making what is haram halal. But at the same time, in order to be more observant, we think it's good that we draw lines and limits, not where Allah has drawn, but beyond it, closer to it. Because we don't want to be closer to the line in which Allah has drawn. We don't want to get to it. And so we start to, in the name of caution, in the name of being careful, they draw limits of Allah's, what is halal, what is haram, much more strictly than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has permitted it to be. And there is a term for it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it, which is called ghulu. Ghulu is exaggeration. Ghulu is where you start to impose on yourself things that Allah has not imposed on you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives very clear examples of the previous people, previous ummah, to whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Tawrat and Injil, that they started to make them things more stricter for them than what Allah had revealed. So then Allah made their things more strict for them as a result, as a punishment for it. And so we understand that we are not supposed to get involved in ghulu. But in subtle ways, we do find in our society, people do involve themselves in those kinds of ghulu in the society. Ghulu is that Allah has drawn a boundary someplace and you decide that you want to draw a boundary beyond it. Because you think that since we are in a danger of falling on the other side, the boundary needs to be brought closer. Which is a mistaken belief in the sense that Allah who has created us, Allah who has placed us in this world, Allah who intimately knows our creation because He is the creator and what our capacities are and what our inclinations are, and every inclination that we carry in ourselves is a result of Allah's creation, and it has a purpose that serves in our life. So in that sense, ghulu is where you try to make things more strict. A very simplistic example of that would be, and I've seen this some masajid do, even in the area here, that according to the calculation, the sunset time is certain time. But what they do is they add 5-10 minutes to it, thinking because of caution, to make more careful. We are going to wait another 10 minutes before you break our fast. So if that caution was required, Allah would have instructed us to take that caution. Now this was a very simplistic example and not worth that much. But there are other examples in which we try to draw lines beyond where they are. Oftentimes we draw lines in terms of our gender etiquettes and place of women in the masjid, and we draw lines beyond what was at the time of Prophet ﷺ and how Prophet ﷺ practiced. And the idea is that the times are bad, and so we need to be extra careful regarding those things. And so I think that is problematic. That is not how we should do. And so making something haram halal is as bad as making something halal haram. And to move boundaries that Allah has given us, the limits, that the hudud that Allah has defined for us, and we move those hudud either as good intention or bad intention. With good intention in the term that we want to be more careful, or bad intention in the sense that we want to relax and do what Allah does not permit. Both are equally wrong in the sight of Allah. And so we should never try to draw lines where they don't belong. And in the same surah, if you come to the later on, this verse 101, which says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la tas'alu an ashiya in tubda lakum tasu'kum wa in tas'alu anha hina yunazzalu al-Qur'anu tubda lakum afallahu anha wallahu ghafurur rahim. To go into the kind of hair-splitting details about the ahkam, that it becomes very difficult to define what it is. I mean, what if this? And you come up with the minutest of the details and try to seek a resolution based on those minutest of the details. Allah prohibits us from doing that. And that leads to, you may think you are doing it with good intention to be careful, but that leads to wrong kind of behavior. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us very stark example of that kind of behavior from the story of Bani Israel and Musa, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded that go and sacrifice a cow. And the people then started all kinds of minutest going, what's its color like, what it looks like, what age it should be, and all those different questions that they were asking, where Allah's command was very simple, just go and slaughter a cow. And they could have gone and picked up any cow and slaughtered it, but they wanted to indulge into all these kinds of detailed questions. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised us from it. We need to understand the spirit behind the broad things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has enjoined on us, and the spirit of broad things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not enjoined on us. And beyond that, any circumstances that we find ourselves, when we are asking too many questions, then either we are not happy with the answer that our heart is giving us, that we're finding it too restrictive, and we are trying to determine if someone else can relax it for us, or we are taking it to the level of ghulu, and in both cases it's a wrong attitude towards it. So we should not indulge in that kind of behavior. The next verse that I wanted to deal with is the verse number 89, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is a long verse, in which He says, لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم ولكن يؤاخذكم بما عقدتم الإيمان فكفارته إطعام 10 مساكين من أوسط ما تطعمون أهليكم أو كسوتهم أو تحرير رقبة فمن لم يجد فصيام 3 أيام ذلك كفارة أيمانكم إذ حلفتم واحفظوا أيمانكم كذلك يبين الله لكم آياته لعلكم تشكرون. Allah does not take you to task for the oaths you utter vainly, but He will certainly take you to task for the oaths you have sworn in earnest. The expiation of breaking such oaths is either to feed 10 needy persons with more or less the same food as you eat, or give to your families, or to clothe them, or to set free from bondage the neck of one man, and he who does not find the means shall fast for 3 days. If you are unable to do any of this, then you should fast for 3 days. That shall be the expiation of your oaths. And so, here, one of the primary principles that I think this is just one way where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is conveying that principle, but throughout the Quran, a contractual agreement between two human beings and promises that we make to each other is very, in terms of their importance, in terms of their severity, they are very strong in the sight of Allah. Because if you imagine our human existence in this world, all of it is based on our relationships with each other. Without those relationships, life will not exist. Whether we go out and do transactions in the world for business, for living life, for earning our livelihood, for arranging our life within our families, within our friends, we all have contractual obligations, promises, expectations of that relationship that exists. And we agree that we will do those things. But all of that is voluntary. There is no force that can bind us. Even if you sign something, yes, sometimes the legal process can come after you. But beyond that legal process, there is no material force and nothing that can bind you to it except a moral force over you. And so keeping those contractual obligations and not violating them is important part of it. And so one of the ways in which people used to do, especially in the old days when written forms of contracts were not as common, people would just swear, yes, they will give you a guarantee. Swearing means they are giving guarantee that that's what they will do. And then they don't fulfill that promise. They don't fulfill that guarantee that they gave. And so as a result, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it as a great violation. There are very few things in life in terms of our social obligations that carry such severe punishments as the one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described here. And so it is important in the sight of Allah. It is much more severe a sin than many of the other sins that we consider is bad for us, and we try to refrain from it. And so these are because all our promises and guarantees are voluntary, are based on our commitment, and those commitments must be met. Even our belief in Allah and Iman in Allah is a commitment. There is no force behind it. Allah is not forcing us to believe in Him, but it's a commitment that we made. When we say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah, that is a commitment we are making. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deals with it as a transaction, tijara. I mean, your Iman and your believing in Allah is multiple places in Quran which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word tijara for it. That you are trading. This is a trade. A trade is essentially is an agreement between two parties. So and another place he very clearly says, Inna Allah ashtara min al-mu'minina anfusahum wa amwalahum bi anna lahumul jannah. That Allah that you are saying something and Allah is guaranteeing something as a result. You are guaranteeing that you are going to believe in Him and observe what He commands from you. And then Allah is saying that He is promising you that He is going to fulfill His promises regarding you when you appear before Him on the Day of Judgment. And so in both cases, this is a contractual obligation that must be met. And so it's important to pay attention to those things. And swearing part, I think in general, Prophet ﷺ discouraged it very much. And certainly in my home, we were not permitted to swear ever, and I don't remember ever swearing. So swearing is not, although in some cultures it becomes something very common, and in general society, you do see its usage all the time. Based on this verse in which breaking that what you are swearing is the consequences are such grave, so why you put yourself in those circumstances? So never swear. And especially as a Muslim, you should be known as a person of character, of such person whose word can be trusted. You shouldn't need to provide any guarantees for your word, ordinary words, because your character should testify on the surety that a person can believe your word. And you shouldn't have to resort to external means to exert your truthfulness to another person. So avoid swearing as much as possible, because the consequences are very severe. The third place where we come to is the common ills and moral indecencies of the society against which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibits us from. And these verses take an added meaning for us because the societies in which we live today are surrounded by these things. And sometimes when you are surrounded by something, then its evilness is not very clear to you because it becomes normalized. And when it becomes normalized, then you're seeing it happening every day. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in verse number 90 to 92, in which He says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu innamal khamru wal maisiru wal anthabu wal azlamu rijsum min amali shaitan fashtanibuhu la'allakum tuflihun. So first of all, intoxicants, games of chance, idolatrous sacrifices at altars, drawing arrows are all abominations and the handiwork of shaitan. So here the translator has translated as the word abomination, but rich is something that you find that you shirk from it. You cannot go near it. If something is smelling really bad, you're going to turn away and run from it. So that kind of dirt that causes a revulsion in you against it is for which the word rijs is used in Arabic. Rajasa, rijs is that kind of dirt, that kind of evil from which you would run away from if it was, say, something like a dirt that you see that you're you are just turned off from completely. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says all these things are that kind of things. Second thing is, in our society, which is very common, is to use chance and rely on chance, lottery, and all of those things that goes on around us. And we rely on lotteries. People in our society rely on those lotteries so much that even the governments use that as legitimate tool to earn income instead of taxing people. That the people will be so driven to it as a mad persons that they wouldn't have to impose tax on it. They will voluntarily part, even at their own loss, they will voluntarily part from the money that can be useful for them in other ways, that can be spent most wisely and more beneficially for this chance of 1 in million, 1 in billion, that they may become rich. And so that is completely against Islamic spirit. That is completely against everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us. And so we must run away from it as far back as we run away in terms when we worry about our tahara. And so these are things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has condemned. We should never take part in this. Wherever there is a chance involved, that some will get something, some will not, and it will be based on a chance, or something will be drawn from some box and allotted to someone. And I see this happen and sometimes even in Muslim events, and I don't know the exact fiqhi legality of those things, but in any case, to even mimic it when it gets to that kind of thing, I think is not right and is not good in my opinion. And we should not indulge in anything that is based on chance, that is based on everyone putting something into something and one person receiving a benefit from it, even if that thing is not requiring you to give up something, even if it is free. I think it is closer to taqwa and closer to righteousness that you don't indulge in things that are of chance. And so here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not using something lottery of a kind where you put something in and then you wait for your results. Just throwing an arrow and then determining based on that arrow some decision. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is prohibiting us from it, and we should not indulge in those things. And sometimes things become so common that we lose the sense of them being wrong. And as you are going through this thought, immediately just few verses down the line, in the same surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ لَا يَسْتَوِي الْخَبِيثُ وَالطَّيِّبُ وَلَوْ أَعْجَبَكَ كَثْرَةُ الْخَبِيثِ فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ يَا أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. Say to them, the bad things and the good things are not equal, even though the abundance of the bad things might make you pleased with them. O people of understanding, beware of disobeying Allah. And so things become so prevalent in the society at certain time that they lose their evilness. Another thing that, at least in the Western society, which is very common, is adultery. No one thinks anything big of it, although no one says it's a good thing, but the whole society indulges in it, promotes it, something that Quran describes as one of the kaba'ir and one of the very base evils. And yet the society's acceptance level to it is such a level that we are unable to condemn it in any way, any shape, any form. And it is also going into Muslim societies now. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning that something that He has declared bad, wrong, evil cannot become good just because the times have changed, just because it has become prevalent in the society. And in those cases that then you should not think of it as it being normalized. Another verse later on from which I want to draw, and in the same sequence of thoughts, is Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu alaykum anfusakum la yadurrukum man dalla idha ihtadaytum ila Allahi marji'ukum jami'an fayunabbi'ukum bima kuntum ta'malun. O people who believe, you are only responsible for your own self. La yadurrukum man dalla idha ihtadaytum. Someone else doing wrong and going astray is not going to affect you if you yourself are guided, if you yourself stand on the principles, on the truth. So just under the peer pressure and the pressure of the society, don't lose yourself. And you are responsible for your own self. And this is also a principle that Quran describes in other ways, in many places. Another way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that is, La taziru waziratun wizra ukhra. No one can carry burden of another person. So our individual responsibility is for ourselves before Allah. And we will not be able to blame for what we do wrong anyone else. The society, the leaders, the people, no one else. On the day of judgment, people will say, Inna sadatana wa kubara'ana dallauna, that it was our leaders and our influential people in the society who led us astray. Allah will say, no, you are responsible for your own self. And you need to watch out for your own self. And so that is also another very important principle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in this surah. So these were the few selective verses that I wanted to pick for our lesson today, based on the content of the Juz 7 of the Quran. So I'll inshallah conclude here. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم.